personally, I always built my career around being in basically a constant state of discomfort. I never wanted to be comfortable. I never wanted to steer a ship straight. I always loved that ability to kind of just be outside of my comfort zone. That pressure, that stress is positive.
Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast, the ultimate destination for accredited investors and entrepreneurs seeking alternative wealth-building strategies. Discover how to fast-track your journey to wealth and time freedom by thinking outside the box. If you're ready to join the ranks of the Contrarian Capitalists and learn the most effective ways to reach your financial goals faster, you're in the right place. Let's get started with today's episode of the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast.
Thank you once again for tuning in another episode of the Contrarian Capitalist Podcast. I'm your host and your favorite silverback, Sylvania Harrod. And on today's episode, I wanted to bring to you somebody that I consider part of the Ugly Truth series. You know, like you would ask me before to find individuals that are actually out there in the jungle, who have made the transition from corporate into the jungle. And by chance of just great people in my network, I got an opportunity to connect with Francisco, who's on this episode. So we're going to dig in, jump around, get a little messy, and just have fun about the journey of life. So, Francisco, thanks for coming on the show, my friend.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, just give people a little information about your background. As I told you before, this is unstructured. Run as far and as fast as you want to, and then we'll just get in there to help the audience.
I'll give you a kind of high level view of me, but I'll also go a little bit deeper than the 50,000 foot view, just because I think it's useful to get that context. My parents are immigrants, right? So I'm a Cuban American, first person born in my family here in the United States, born in Miami, Florida. From childhood was kind of given, American dream, go. So that was my equation. Go to school, do your best, work hard, get a job, do what you got to do to kind of climb that corporate ladder or whatever ladder it is that's in front of you. Go back to school, continue to learn and educate yourself and really just do that until you retire and peace out. And so it's interesting because I did follow that equation for my entire life, right? I went to school, I went to undergrad, I got a job, 2 years before I even graduated from undergrad, jumped into the workforce full time after I graduated, got my MBA, 5 or 6 years in, started working on that and climbed that corporate ladder right from, my first days as an associate financial analyst at Johnson & Johnson, the world's largest and most diversified healthcare company in the world. And then, my last corporate role was I was one of the heads of corporate development at Johnson & Johnson, specifically responsible for Latin America. I'd also held roles where I was a global director of M&A and corporate development, buying and growing, the company inorganically. And, the interesting thing was I kind of jumped off that ladder and didn't continue, right, to follow that equation all the way through retirement, which is a really easy thing to do, right? When you climb that ladder, you can get real comfortable real fast. And so right now I consider myself kind of, I wouldn't say ex-corporate, I'm corporately trained, right? I got the best of the best out of that experience. It was an amazing experience to refine my skills, but now I've kind of stepped outside of that sandbox, that corporate sandbox. And as more of an entrepreneur, right, I manage my own consulting portfolio to serve others. And for me, it was an amazing kind of journey from learning and helping one company grow and to be, the biggest and continue to be the best in its industry field, to saying, you know what, my why, right, as a person is to serve other people. And as much as I could enjoy for myself learning and doing that with one company, it's been fantastic to be able to kind of step outside of that realm and basically build my own businesses, my own path forward, and to serve people exactly the way that I love to serve people.
What's unique about something that you said was you went from like being at a place where you're growing in the organization and you're learning and you're corporately trained. And I actually found that as a tactical advantage. It's really weird, especially in my profession, which was technology sales. We were one of the very few people who were measured like weekly, monthly, daily. And all your people around you knew that. And while I was going through it, I didn't realize the value it provided until I started consulting other companies. And I found that the difference between a company that can get to a place of excellence, like a Johnson & Johnson or an Amazon, versus those that don't, is because they have business systems. And seeing those systems and being conditioned by those systems made it very prevalent and very obvious when I went and saw other companies. And I'm like, you have no process? You have 2 customers that are doing everything for you? Man, you're sitting on a house of cards. So like, tell me some of those corporate trained items that seemed like they were mundane and nonchalant inside of like Johnson & Johnson that now you see were so valuable to other small businesses as you're going through right now.
Yeah, you hit it. So I always kind of make it real simple, right? There's purpose, right? What is it that you're trying to do? What is the company trying to achieve? That's usually pretty easy, right? Like you've got customers, you've got patients, you're trying to, address some sort of real tangible unmet need. Then there's process and then there's profit, right? So those 3 Ps are kind of how I start the conversation. And you hit it right on the head, right? I think people, in my experience, business owners in general, undervalue how critically important a consistent, fundamentally driven process is, right? I was talking with somebody the other day and we were talking about, fundamentals, right? This isn't like your crazy outside the box moves that you're making based on short-term trends or things that are fads. Like 80-90% of what a good business does is fairly boring, right? It's very consistent, predictable, but with consistency, it's important. So, for me, I was a graduate from Johnson & Johnson's Financial Leadership Development Program. I believe the program was also, ultimately inspired by GE's kind of financial leadership development programming, right? Where I came in and from the get-go, I had, 4 years as an undergrad of tremendous academic kind of perspective, right? Like I understood theory, I understood concepts. I didn't have any real world experience. And so it was interesting because that leadership development programming, I did it throughout my career, right? I did it early on. I did it as I was, in management and beyond. But the key thing for me was, and you're right, I kind of underappreciated it for a little while. But in retrospect, what was important was I was taught, in these environments about the importance of having, great financial discipline, great processes. For me, I'm an individual that would write out my SOPs, write my standard operating procedures, how I got things done. It was important too, because if I wanted to move on to another role, I needed somebody to be able to step into that role seamlessly. So by having those processes written out and having playbooks, which I've always had for myself, is here's how I'm able to deliver. Also, the secret sauce is always going to be there, but 80% of what you're doing should be fairly teachable. And what I'd ultimately find was, hey, I could actually move and grow and continue to pursue new, more challenging things if I had that process under my belt. And the company would hire, at Johnson & Johnson, I had some of the best speakers of the world, right? Teaching me those soft skills of how do you communicate? How do you plant ideas like a seed, in someone's mind so that they can understand it? How do you tell stories to make what you're ultimately trying to achieve more approachable? So long story short is that without, all those different layers, and I kind of always go back to, it's an onion, right? There's a lot of layers of process and perspective. You're not going to be able to navigate as seamlessly all the complexity and all the challenge that's going to come from the world, business in general. And then also, more importantly, if you're growing your own business, just trying to do that independently without as much accountability, to lean on. So I could go into little things in detail, but the one thing I did say for myself and also for others, and something that my old corporate colleagues would hear me say all the time, and they joke around, they're like, Francisco's got a little bit of HR in him, because I would say, hey, we're spending months and months and months every single year business planning, doing strategic plans for the business. How are we going to be competitive? The bar is always going to be raised higher and higher. One of the CEOs that I grew up with early in my career, he had a saying, right? Pleased but never satisfied, right? Every single time you finish a year, that baseline is no longer acceptable. You got to have to kind of up the game a little bit. And so what I would find is it was really, really important to be able to say, okay, yeah, we're strategically planning like crazy for how we're going to shape our business, shape our portfolios, challenge status quo, grow the business top line, and then efficiently kind of push the bottom line to be as healthy as possible as well. Operationally, tackling different ways of growing, different models. But people spend a lot of time thinking about their career development themselves. I would always challenge myself and others, hey, step back a little bit, try to be a little objective and go, okay, you're spending all these months trying to strategically grow the business, but what are you doing to challenge yourself. Like, what do you want to do this year, the next 3, 5, 10 years, and take that opportunity to really shape your career path and figure out what it is that you want to do. It doesn't always have to be a corporate career path. And me, I love, I always love the illustration of just, there's a lot of books in this world, right? You don't just pick up one and read it over and over again. You got it and you say, that was a fantastic story. That was a great book. On to the next fantastic story. I need to keep learning. I need a different angle at what I'm interested in. And I do find that a lot of people are stuck in an encyclopedia of what is their career story. And it's one seamless end-to-end story. And in the past, that may have been okay, having 40 years, 50 years at one place. And kudos to those that can actually do that. But I view it as like, nowadays, it's more about having a really strong chapter, close that chapter, move on to the next. But going back to your point on process, you have to really think systematically about everything you're doing, where you're putting your time. And I think you just are trained instinctively to think that way in a corporate environment. And it's going to serve you well in really anything you're doing.
I completely agree with you, because when I think about even my calendar today is very much similar to what it was a year ago. I still mentally think about things like a couple weeks in advance, and I just map out, like I go into the month and like, okay, what are the key pillars I need to put in there? What are the measurables I need to update? And so like, as I look at my team, I'm sharing the same thing I was sharing before. The only difference is that like, I just have more time freedom than what I had before to do the thing. So like this morning I was sitting there and I was just in a creative mood. So it's like the creative juices are flowing, things are there. So I just went, I'm like, all right, I got music going, things happening, and I'm just knocking out different pieces of articles or things for different clients that was there because I was in the zone. And so like that happened and I realized, I was like, oh, this needs to be more structured into my calendar. So now I'm looking through my calendar and I'm going like, all right, this block of window, let's see if we can do it twice a week. It's like, okay, this is the standard of where things are at. Let me see if I can implement that more, because that creative helps set the tone for the rest of the day. And I think it's so beautiful just thinking about those items as you were describing. And so sometimes I find that like when I talk to people in the audience, and because I'm always looking at two-way communication channels, because I don't want to just be sitting here talking at a wall, like I like talking and engaging. So I'll do outreach. I'll reach out to people that are listening to the show. And one of the things that I find is that sometimes people struggle with what you described as far as the encyclopedia, because now they're being inundated with advertisements. You go on YouTube, everybody's telling you how I can go through and make $1 gajillion in 10 minutes of my sleep, but nobody actually shares the other side of what it takes to get to the moment that you're doing things in your sleep. And so I know in your job in mergers and acquisition, you were looking at companies constantly, you were evaluating these different companies. And so what would you say was like the critical skill that you saw? Like if you had to identify like one skill in kind of the good or the bad, if there's more, that's up to you. But I'm just curious, like what's the consistent thing you saw in the people that were making things happen versus those who were just barely getting by?
That's actually easy. So yeah, you're right. I mean, in my career, my job was to grow a nearly $100 billion company, right? You can't do that organically. You have to do that inorganically and organically. But ultimately spent a lot of time with, teams of experts alongside myself, just examining and doing deep diligence, right? Strategic, financial, technical diligence on hundreds and hundreds of companies, boiling the ocean at any given point in time, just trying to really find the right opportunities. And what I found the best companies did consistently was they had process, right? They had that really strict process, but part of their process was not to reinvent the wheel. I found that if you surround yourself with experts that are extremely, and they could be really niche, really specialized experts, but if you surround yourself with a village of people that know what they do inside and out, that can do it in their sleep, that have built their careers on excellence in one area, and you just basically just have, this Rolodex of relationships around you, you're going to succeed, right? Because I've worked with, different companies, and all the momentum, all the strength is tied to one visionary, one, strong mind and contributor that's got an idea of what the company needs to do. And that person can't duplicate themselves, right? It's very, very difficult for them to do that. So they have to be good people leaders in the sense that they have to attract people like themselves that are equally ambitious, equally visionary, that are, big on challenging status quo, that they want to make a big impact, right? They don't just want to do a job. They want to do something that's going to, be amazing for their end customer. And again, you can't do that by yourself. So what I always find is that, like, if I find somebody that's trying to be chief cook and bottle washer, that person's going to have a really, really hard time succeeding in whatever they're trying to do. But if they can say, yeah, I've got one of the best coaches in the world, right? Some of the best athletes, do they have no coach? No, they've got fantastic coach, that can provide them tough love, right? Accountability. Sometimes just people need that tough love from a good coach. Somebody that's a fantastic marketer, somebody that's a fantastic, advertiser, somebody that's like me, kind of like, I've got a finance, accounting, economics background. I'm the numbers guy. I'm the detective. I'm the forensic guy in the background, really focused in on, do you know your numbers or not? And if you do know your numbers, then you're also going to be in a position. So for me, I guess the short answer is, you got to have those people around you. And yeah, you've got sometimes to invest in those relationships, both in terms of time. I think that's the most expensive investment is, you're going to have to put time into making sure that you're on the same page in what you're trying to achieve. But also, oftentimes, these are people that are running businesses, and you've got to invest and see the value that they're delivering to the table and see that as an investment that's not short term, but long term. As you're investing in your business via time, via outsourcing, some things to experts, getting that critical strategic advice from other people, being humble and welcoming that input. As you're doing all those things, you're operating in a way that in the long run, you're gonna probably be at a competitive advantage. And that's, I think, where I saw a lot of really exciting opportunity when I talk to a business owner or a potential target is like, man, they know what they're doing. They've got a process in place. And from an M&A standpoint, that would be beautiful, because sometimes I'd be thinking, okay, well, we're going to bring some of that in-house, and it's going to, we're going to learn from that. We have to be somewhat agnostic and understand that we don't know everything, right? So it's important to bring people in that think that same way and that challenge status quo and ultimately build something that's bigger than themselves.
What's interesting about what you were stating is that, like, the people that I've found as well that are really exceptional in what they do, they specialize on a skill. Like, there's a certain skill that they have. And then those who are like masters of none, jack of all trades, masters of none, just end up running around like a bat with its head cut off, or chicken with its head cut off. And they go through and they're trying to run these organizations and they're trying to do this, but what they realize is that the limitation is them. Like, they are the gap. And so the only way they can exceed or go to the next level is they either have to grow themselves by, like, recognizing this is my actual zone of genius, or this is not my zone of genius. And I find, like, that same thing happens for the person who's working the 9 to 5, is that they're going through the system and they're trying to figure out, like, they're chasing opportunities, like they're chasing these opportunities because you hear, oh my goodness, guess what's happening with AI is the next thing. So you need to create an AI business and go on an AI route. Or you need to go through and you need to feel like, I remember like 10 years ago, it was like, everybody needs to build a Facebook ads agency. You need to build this agency because it's the next thing. Or you need to buy short-term rentals because it's so exciting, but then you're starting to realize legislation's starting to lock down. Or you go in and you're like, actually, I really don't like hospitality, But hearing you share, like, you going from, I'm going to guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you've probably always loved numbers, like, and so, like, having a very systemized, I'd be very surprised in life if you weren't already systemized into what you do from an efficiency perspective. And it's amazing seeing, like, you're just doing who you already are, Yeah. And so, like, how did you get to that place of comfort, of just like self-acceptance of, like, this is who I am. I'm not trying to do all these other things because that's not who I am, but rather, like, the business that you're doing right now in your consultancy is just another expression of who you are. How did you get to that place?
Yeah, it takes time, right? So there's kind of a couple things. One is, if you're constantly out there trying to figure out what you're, like, have other people basically define you, right? Like, the folks that are out there chasing after fads, chasing after things, it may be purely because those fads are lucrative, right? Like, oh man, I want to chase after that wave of potential, profit, right? That's out there if I catch this wave just right. And there's always going to be those waves out there. For me, I've always been raised. I think part of it is that, some people are raised to just make sure that they're stepping back and reflecting on like, what is it that they actually are passionate about? So sometimes, regardless of what those waves of opportunity look like, for me, I was raised, from like I said, by parents that were immigrants that came to this country, that are, that escapism came to, to the United States, and they had, freedom right at their fingertips. And they taught me, take full advantage of that, but don't chase. I was never raised to chase after numbers. I was always raised to say, hey, if you do what you're most passionate about as an individual, what you do really well, what resonates with you, what comes across is not so much a job, but a passion, the profit, the financial upside, right? The good from that perspective will come, right? If you're chasing after the numbers, it's a different story altogether. That was actually one of the reasons I was attracted to J&J, is that historically they've had this, credo that they've got plastered on every single wall. And it's, hey, we got to focus on the patient, the customer, the doctor, right? This is a healthcare company. Then the employee is important. Then the community is super important. And then last is shareholder, wealth maximization, right? And profit. And so the equation was reversed. A lot of companies flip that on its head and go, man, we have to do whatever we can to have the best numbers possible. And so it's a really complicated answer to some degree, because there's a lot of layers to discovering, what I'm passionate about. But ultimately, it does take time to sit back and reflect. And it also, like I said, you can't do it by yourself. Sometimes you have to have your parents, your friends, mentors spend enough time with you to kind of point you and say, whether or not you recognize this, you're really good at this. This is your superpower. You've got an ability to do X, Y, and Z. And when you get that feedback and intentionally want to deploy it and integrate it into whatever you're doing, then it's going to allow you to say, yep, I got to dig deep on this one area I'm really good at. And you kind of can find your niche and kind of roll from there. But if you're in the dark, right, and like you said, you're kind of a master of none, it's really hard to navigate, right? When you're kind of like left, I love the deep sea fish, right? If you're in the open ocean and you don't have a plan of, well, this is where I'm going to go, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to get back, pretty difficult. I always say, if you're in the dark, that's because you just don't have a roadmap. You don't have something lighting your way, allowing you to get to where you want to be. But the contrast between dark and light, right, having something to aim towards is huge. And so, I could go on about me, but I can say that I figured out what I love to do. And it actually really didn't, it's interesting. It really didn't have to do as much with numbers. Numbers is just something that I enjoy doing. Financials is the lifeblood of a business. If you don't know your numbers, if you don't have somebody that's as passionate about the nerdy, financial process as I am, that's something I recommend to people. Find that person for your business. Find me to infuse into that process so that you get a little bit of financial discipline deployed into your business. But the key thing is, for me, my why was always, how do I serve people, and how do I engage with people? And in business, the finance person has a seat at the table from the very beginning. Absolutely. And so what was cool for me was that throughout my whole career, the best way for me to serve my team or to actually serve the business was to be exposed to, what are we trying to achieve, right? The strategy. And so, being that finance person, no matter how low level I started, right, at a company, you always could hear, the leadership saying, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Here's how we want to operate. And then you could figure out, how do you contribute to that? And so for me as an individual, I contributed to that by extremely mindful of, let's champion this mission, right? Let's make sure people understand what they're doing contributes to a bigger goal. And also, no role is too small, right? As a finance person, I managed, all the financials and the accounting, and helped close the books early on in my career. But I also was like, hey, I would say, is this investment disconnected from what I'm hearing senior leaders want to actually do? Is this kind of dilutive, or is it value creating for where we're trying to go? And so you have to really, again, make sure that you're connecting the dots to your passion, to your expertise, to, everything that you're doing. Otherwise, again, it's going to be really, really difficult to kind of find that friction and that traction and see that progress.
So what's unique about what you were saying, like as I package that, is that you chase what's chasing you. So like, if you think about it, like I don't have to force you to want to engage in business or learn about business. You don't have to force yourself to do that because you're constantly learning who you are, you know? And so as you look at that process and you go through it, it allows you to say, okay, this is just my jam. I've labeled for the audience that retirement is the day when you stop doing the thing that you tolerate and you start embracing the thing that you love. And you get to just like dig into that like day by day by day. Like for myself, I love connecting with people. You know, like I love nothing more than learning about a new person, learning who they are as a person, you know, like not a human doing, but a human being. Like, who do you choose to be? Why are you the way that you are? Let me learn about your biography. Let me learn about those moments. And I will tell you, you have a competitive advantage versus anybody else. People don't understand the amount of like extra oomph you have when you're first generation, especially as an immigrant, because you have perspective. You get some of the best people and most driven people I've ever met in my life were immigrants, because they're especially first generation, because they came here and they're like, hold up. You're telling me I have all of this. This is the opportunity. Can you guys not see this? And I share, like, you go around other countries and you realize there's one commonality in the entire world. Like, people will have not running water in countries, but they all have Facebook. They all have phones. And this little device is the most amazing thing, because I'm in my house. I went from secret reader, wearing my Stitch costume, to walking in here, having a conversation with you. And the beautiful thing is that like, we're able to build connection with people I would have never had the opportunity 20 years ago. Because if they weren't in your immediate circle, you couldn't do it, you know? So it's fascinating seeing those things. And now we get to like the technology is evolving at such a pace that we get access to information that we never had before. So like meeting people is so much easier, but you have to know who you are before you can do that. And that's the real journey, is like, let me learn who I am. Like, what are the things I love to do? And then let me just surround myself with people that love doing those things, you know? And so for those of you that are out there that are like, guess what? I'm not a financial numbers person. Find somebody with a level of passion. Like, I've learned really quickly, in order to scale and really have the ultimate time freedom, identify the things you strongly dislike, and then put somebody in place that loves doing what you hate. And it makes things so much easier, because that person comes along and they're just like, man, I love reading over tax law. I go, please and thank you. But they're like, I hate public speaking. Well, then let me show up and do that. I'll speak all over the world on anything, on any topic in a moment's notice. You don't even have to prep me. Just give me a microphone. Tell me who the audience is. That's it. But I know plenty of, like, it's the biggest fear in the world is actually public speaking, you know, like listening to that, like identifying who you are, and then surround yourself with people who love doing the things you strongly dislike. And then that allows you, like, if you're listening and you're like, hey, I actually want to acquire a business and maybe that's my next avenue, I will forewarn you, if you're going to do a business and you're going to acquire something and go through it, everything has its honeymoon phase. Make sure it's something you're uniquely interested in, because if not, in a year from now, it's all gonna normalize. And that same like tolerance and like tolerating things is going to be there again. And so, man, I mean, I know eventually I'm probably going to get to a point where it's just like straight 3 hours just kicking it with people. But like, I know that like the audience is probably listening to this like on their drive to the office, or they're having a little lunch break. They want to pop the earbuds in. So to land the plane, if I'm sitting there and I'm on the fence, you know, because I don't find that the people that are listening are highly educated. They're doers. They're making things happen. They're growing in their lifestyle. But what I find is that in that element of busyness, there's also a space of like indifference. So like, you've made the jump from corporate to out there in the jungle, you know, like making things happen, going through that process. If you could give them like one piece of advice, well, what would that be?
What I would highly encourage people to do is just make sure that they're building that time for that self-reflection, right? I'm very simple. I love to be outside. So when I'm done with a busy day, either by myself or maybe with my son, I'll be on a paddle board, hopefully out in the Gulf, just by myself, right? Like trying to process these things. But you have to really think about, what is it that prevents people from kind of taking paths? I would say comfort, can be a big enemy, right? In a corporate career, I could have very easily, and most people do, see themselves basically just as a corporate employee, kind of doing what they do, maybe very, very well for an entire career, whether or not it's with one company or multiple companies. There's a comfort zone to that, right? Because it's predictable. You know what role you fill in, and you just play that role. And then at the end of the day, there's also, fear, right? Fear of failure. If you do something unexpected, out of the ordinary, are you going to fail? Like, being a business entrepreneur or business owner is not easy. It's actually tremendously difficult. It's a lot more difficult than being an individual contributor or a people leader in a corporate setting. So what if that doesn't play out the way I expect? The key thing, though, is to step back and make sure that there's that time to say, what is it that I'm going to gain from making that move, taking that step across the line into a little bit of discomfort. For me personally, I have always built my career around being in basically a constant state of discomfort. I never wanted to be comfortable. I never wanted to steer a ship straight. I always loved that ability to kind of just be outside of my comfort zone. That pressure, that stress is positive. It really shapes you. And so what I would, outright recommend is, taking that leap of faith. If you are a go-getter, an individual contributor, somebody that's been professionally trained, that has that niche ability, tell that story. Make sure people know what it is that you do particularly well. I struggle with that a little bit because I've been raised to be, to actually avoid being prideful and to be a little bit more humble. But you got to own it. You got to kind of step up and say, hey, I'm an expert at X, Y, and Z. This is what I do particularly well. This is what I'm trying to achieve, and get people around you that want to join you on that journey. Don't try to do it on your own. But what you're going to find is that your day-to-day isn't going to change all that dramatically, right? So I went from being a corporate kind of leader in an M&A space where I was, acquiring innovation on behalf of one company. In my job, I still do that same exact thing, but I own and operate my own life science consultancy, right? I own and operate as a strategic partner a cost optimization firm that serves people with their financial operations to improve their profitability. I do those things that I've done throughout my career very, very well. But what I gained was, I know I can do it. I had that confidence. But now, guess what? I don't have various layers of bureaucracy or various layers of governance that I have to manage, right? I don't have as much approval, process that I have to worry about. It ultimately lands on my shoulders. If I think I'm moving in a direction that lines up with my vision and my mission for serving others with what I do, I'm going to take that path forward. At the same time, work-life balance is a big, big piece that comes into play, right? I struggle with that concept of work-life balance, right? I ultimately look at it as simply a pie graph, and for me, I would constantly, take snapshots of where I thought my pie graph was. Is the vast majority of it work? And then maybe there's a sliver for friendships, sliver for community, sliver for family. That's a pretty, scary imbalance. So I wouldn't say, you can't get a perfect balance at all times, but when you step outside of, that corporate environment and you can really say, hey, here's what I care for and love and prioritize most, it makes it that much easier for you to say, okay, here's work. And I know that because I'm disciplined about what I'm doing, I can put a pin in work for a moment and I can go and spend time with my community. I can go and spend time with my son, go to a field trip with him. Last year, I taught an ultimate Frisbee class. I had a friend of mine that was a hippie from Colorado in undergrad that he loved to play Frisbee. And I was constantly playing ultimate with him in college. And I was like, you know what? I can carve out time every single week. It was every Friday. I'd carve out about 2 hours. Hey, I'm going to go teach some kids about ultimate Frisbee and kind of get, and that was a win-win for both the kids and for myself. But you can't do that as easily when you're in a 9-to-5 because you're constantly actually disillusioned that it actually is a 9-to-5. A lot of people work way more than 9-to-5. They're working 6 to 6, 6 to 8. And if you were to ask my wife, I would constantly be getting messages on my phone and I would be locked into work at 10 o'clock at night. When you're your own boss, right? When you're your own leader, you're not doing anything differently. You just have to look yourself in the mirror every day and say, I can't blame anyone but myself for how I allocate my time and what I do. And at the end of the day, that's extremely freeing because you're gonna have the ability to, if you do good work, you can continue doing good work. But now you've got the ability to, basically take your time back. The last thing I would say is there is no timeline. I've learned that 15 years into my career. Some people discover this after they've retired, or maybe they retired early, and they're like, hey, I'm 55, I'm 60. And all of a sudden they realize that they want to do something for themselves. Try to figure out where that line is as soon as possible in your career. Because I argue that the first 15 years of my career were amazing. That's where I got a lot of confidence, and I built an incredible portfolio of experiences that allowed me to know, yep, I can go and serve others really well and be a great business partner to many, many companies. And I can do that without any imposter syndrome behind me, right? It's a fact. It's fact-based, it's data-based. I can go after that. Figure out where that is. When you're 30, when you're 35, when you're 40, draw that line and don't wait until you've basically given all of your best energy towards, that corporate path. Because the world is constantly changing. So, whatever you draw that path, it's going to be a fun challenge. Embrace it right there and then. Don't look back, just step forward. And you're going to find people in this world that get exactly what you're doing. And also, believe it or not, people are watching. So people will go, oh man, I wish I could do that. And and anyone could. But now you've got a really cool element of your story that you also need to have a responsibility for telling. Go out there and make sure people know, hey, I had the golden handcuffs on and I shattered them. And I went down a road where there were no necessary guarantees, but I wouldn't choose it any other way. And here's why. So for me, it's a fun process. It's a scary one for some, but if you really can reflect and step across that line with the confidence that this is going to be a win-win for everything, right? Your life, personally, professionally, and otherwise, it's an awesome adventure and one that I'd love to, talk to anybody about, because it's one that's very, very fulfilling as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like when I think about just myself in general, and if you're listening to this, you're probably a contrarian by nature. So it's like life is a journey no matter what. Like I fell in love with the process. Like the process is the process. It's going to be there. Like it's like I'm on the highway, but sometimes I have pit stops. I got to go to the bathroom. I need something to eat. I need to get some fuel, charge one of my EVs. But it doesn't mean you're not doing the journey. Like you just keep embracing the journey and embracing it. And then for some people, the flavor is, I got to wait 30 years. For other people, it's 3 years. There's no rules to this game. Like the game is the game. And so like, as you get to listening to you, like as they get to step into that and embrace that and realize life is preparing you for those moments. So let your imagination run wild. Like listen to those desires that are there because you're prepared. And when the moment comes, just do it, embrace it and enjoy. So like, how can people get a hold of you if they want to connect with you or have discussions or go through that? Kind of share with the audience, like best ways to contact you.
Yeah. The best way to contact me is, everybody's on LinkedIn, right? So, I'll share with you guys my email address. Feel free to reach out to me. I'll share with you my cell phone, my my work phone, whatever. But LinkedIn is usually the easiest because then we can share, exchange our availability and jump into a conversation. And it's also a great way to just kind of, get to know one another, right? When somebody reaches out to me or I reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, make sure that page represents you, right? So when you go on there, you'll see there's a bunch of stuff I'm passionate about. There's boards I'm on. There's jobs I do. There's businesses I own. Go through there and peruse, but reach out to me. And I'd love to connect. For me, that's the way that I grow my personal and professional relationships is like, let's have a conversation. We probably have a ton in common. And like I said, none of us should be doing this by ourselves. So the more people that are awesome people doing awesome things that you don't want to do, or you want somebody else to do alongside you, that's how you find your best network of folks to kind of prioritize around you. And that's a good way to get a hold of me. So look forward to talking to anybody interested in really just talking about career, life, all the above.
Perfect. Well, Francisco, it's been a privilege, man, kicking it with you. And so as always, if you're listening to this episode, thank you for tuning in the entire time. Guys, stay hungry, stay humble, and just enjoy the journey. Cheers, everybody.